This week on Let's Talk Motorsport. After a long absence, Mark catches up with international road racer Jeff Sayle. And returning to the track out of retirement, 7-time Speedway World Champion Jason Crump.
Welcome to Let's Talk Motorsport. I'm Mark Brax as we head into another episode. Number 18 it is. Who would have thought that was possible? I'm still getting a bit used to it. It's a bit surreal, especially when I see myself with this head for radio on a big screen when I'm looking at it and looking past episodes. But good to see you're still with us. Our numbers are growing. Good times are starting to happen. Things are loosening up a bit. I've just seen Jack Miller being signed to the MotoGP with the factory Ducati team, which is great for him. Daniel Ricciardo stepping up with McLaren next year, so good news all around there. And hopefully we'll be back to some sense of normality in the next few months and we'll get these seasons underway. But in the meantime, we've got another great show tonight. First up with a couple of real personalities of the sport. Going back to the 80s, we're going to have a chat with Jeff Sayle, and also from more recent times, our multiple world champion in the Speedway star, Jason Crump. But let's kick the show off first up and catch up with Jeff Sayle. G'day Jeff Sayle, where you been for so long? I haven't seen you at a racetrack in years.
I do get to a few, Mark, but yeah, a little bit, stay at home. Go to the Eastern Creek meetings and things like that, but there's not been turning them in these days.
So what have you been
to a few overseas ones in New Zealand, Timaru a couple of years ago. So yeah, got lots of things to do at home.
So you're not missing it too much then?
Oh, you miss it. It's always in your blood. It always will be. But time goes. You've got kids. You've got to do other things, and a wife that needs me not to be at a racetrack.
Yeah, true. I suppose you've been pretty busy just trying to keep the wolf from the door, as we've all been doing in recent years.
Yeah, and the last month has been a bit of a challenge for everybody. I suffered from a little bit of a lung condition, so I've had to stay isolated at home, still working, which is good, but I've been here for about 4 weeks now. Crawling up the walls and actually looking through, going through a few boxes of old photos and putting them on Facebook. So
yeah,
myself occupied.
I've noticed a few of them, and you've gone, not only going back to your road racing days, you've gone right back to where you started on a wee little dirt bike. Tell us about that and how all that started, because, well, I'll just let people know, in case you don't know, Jeffrey Sayle is the younger brother of Murray Sayle, who we'll talk to him pretty soon one of these days as well. But yeah, Jeff, I suppose with Murray being it, was it a case of if he can do it, I can do it as well?
A little bit that way. I mean, our family was always interested and involved in motorcycles in roundabout sort of way, more so as spectators. My father during the war was in the army and did do quarter-mile sprint racing at Holsworthy and things like that. So when the war was over, I think they were very much enthusiasts of motorsport. So we spent a lot of time from when I was 1 till, well, now, at motorbike tracks. And that's where it started. My eldest brother joined the motorcycle club, Parramatta Motorcycle Club, and then Murray joined, and Murray started racing. At the time, I was playing soccer at a reasonable level, so I was into that. And then one day I just decided, Muzz is going pretty good, I might try this.
And how long did it take you before you started going all right at it?
Oh, it took me a while. I mean, the photos you referenced to were dirt tracks at Nepean and Amory Park and Arcadia, where I did a bit of motocross and short circuit racing. I did that for a little bit, and then on the same bike I used to do road racing. It was a DT1 Yamaha Trails bike. put some flat bars on it, some K81 tyres, and I rode that for about a year, and then I bought an RD250 and sort of took off from there.
So how old were you when that happened?
Well, at the time, I mean, it's a little bit different these days, but back then you couldn't get a licence till you were 17. So the first chance, I think I turned 17 in October, and I got a racing licence in November and started from there.
And how long before you thought, oh, I'm not too bad at this?
First lap.
Good on you.
No, I sort of did a bit of. It was a bit hard on the dirt track. I went okay at club level. Road racing on a DT 250 trails bike, you weren't going to be competitive. But once I got the RD 250, I started to win some 250 Proddy races, and it sort of went from there. I think in 72 or 73, I rode with Murray in the 6-hour race, and we won that. And that year, I actually won the 6-hour, the Adelaide 3-hour, Bathurst, and every production race they had at Oran Park or Ramaroo Park. So good little bike, cost me about $600 and made me a fortune.
Yeah, well, it's, you adapted well to it as coming off the dirt and then getting onto a, well, not a purebred racing machine, but the RD350s back then, even though they were road bikes, they were still pretty sporty too.
Oh, they were quick, and they're probably the precursors to a lot of the racing bikes. I mean, a lot of the stuff that was on them was off the old racing bikes. So they were a really, really good production bike. They were fantastic, and everybody virtually in those days started in 250 production racing. So it was a good stepping stone.
Was Muzz much of a help for you? I know he was off doing his thing as well, but you would have been sharing paddocks over that time as well as you were kicking off, and he was more established in the teams he was dealing with at the time?
Yeah, no, it was always a family effort in a way. My dad always helped with the bikes. Murray always helped me, always found time to help me. I wasn't, at the time, I'll say I got a bit better as time went by. I wasn't the best mechanic in the world. So, but in those days, on a 250 production bike, you put petrol in them, your eyes on them, and you went racing. And the things were quick enough to win. So a little bit changed these days. I don't think they abide by the rules as much as we did, but that's racing.
Yeah, and well, you stayed here for a few years, but then you went over to the big boys and threw your hat in the ring over there, and you didn't do too shabbily over there either.
Yeah, I probably had a good start. I think 75, if you go back a little bit, I mean, 75, I won the Australian 350 Championship. I come second at Bathurst to Murray. In the 350, I come second to Robert Hinton in the 250. I thought at that stage, yeah, I'm starting to get a bit better at this. Then as time went by, I ended up with a 500 Suzuki, a 750 Yamaha. My big break probably came when I won the Marlborough Series in New Zealand, which was over the Christmas period. Used to get a lot of overseas riders come to that event. And the year that I was fortunate enough to win it, Marco Lucanelli was there, Wes Cooley, Murray Gregg, Warren Willing, Stuart Vaughn, John Woodley. So I had really, really good 4 or 5 weeks. And a journalist friend that became a friend, was there from England, and he suggested that I give it a go in Europe. And at the time, it was pretty well known that Greg was going to Europe. So when this journalist went back to England, he contacted somebody, and the guy said he'd paid me airfare and give me a van for the year. So I'd sort of won enough money to buy a TZ 750, and at the time, I don't think you'll believe it, they were only $5,000. So we bought a 750, and Mick Smith and myself ventured off into the wide unknown at the time.
Yeah, but it would have been a lot of fun doing that too. How old were you when you took off over there?
Yeah, I was 23. So these days, that's not compared young, but back in our time, it was sort of a pretty young age to be going over. I had some reasonable results the first year, but unfortunately, the gentleman that paid my airfare was killed in the race meeting in Ireland halfway through the year. So that put a bit of a spanner in the works, but we kept trying, sometimes frustrating, but always fun.
And well, going from the tracks in Australia, which were, I suppose, back then they were relatively safe compared to what you were doing. Okay, we had Bathurst every year, and you did pretty well up there. But then you were saying like you're going over to the tracks in Europe, the Isle of Man, the Irish road races, Spa-Francorchamps in Belgium. All those other ones. I don't know if you went to Yugoslavia, but that one at Opatia where Kel Carruthers won his world championship racing on cobblestones and all that sort of thing. A bit of an eye-opener for you, was it, with the quality of the tracks?
The quality of the tracks, some of the ones in Europe that you just mentioned, yeah, or the Isle of Man and the Ulster Grand Prix, Norwest 200 road races, and you knew what to expect. I mean, you can't have a lot of safety barriers around circuits that are some 37 miles long. I never raced at the one you mentioned at Opatia. I did race at Yugoslavia, but they had the last race meeting in Opatia about 2 years before I got there, so I didn't get to ride that one. I actually did a lap of the track in a van, and that was good enough for me because it was pretty dangerous.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things you don't think. The tracks are there to race at. That's what's there. If you want to do the sport, race what's in front of you. I mean, yes, the safety issue now is a lot more pronounced than it used to be, but that was an ongoing thing when I was in Europe, that sort of Kenny Roberts and your Barry Sheens were kicking up a stink, for want of another word, about the safety. And that safety, from when I first went to the last time I went, had improved immensely then. Still not quite up to scratch like it is today, but the racetracks were there to be raced on, and that's what you're getting paid for.
And when you're going over there, were the local competitors, the English and the Irish, were they give you a helping hand? Was it a camaraderie in the pits that here's a new kid on the block, will showing the way around, so to speak, or did you have to do the laps in a car to know the track and all that sort of thing, the tracks you were, particularly the road tracks that you were going to?
Well, when I first went to England and I raced there, no help whatsoever from the local riders. They all say all those tricks of the trade wouldn't give you a lot of help. In Europe, a lot more people had helped you there. The Irish people were fantastic. And yeah, places like the Isle of Man, all we did was I went over there probably 3 or 4 weeks before the Isle of Man at different stages and just drove a car round and round and round until at least you knew the direction. I mean, driving it in a car and then getting on a 750 Yamaha for your first lap is totally mind-blowing, because those corners you've been coming up to at 30 mile an hour, now you're coming up at 100 mile an hour. And yeah, it was scary, I suppose, but no. In the end, you walk away from there, and I think you leave something, you probably have a lifelong dream. And I knew it was one of my father's things. He used to love the Isle of Man, listen to it on the radio, and to actually race there and be reasonably competitive, I think, although he passed, I think he would have been pretty proud.
I'm sure he would have. And with going over there, with, like you said, jumping on a TZ750, I know that speeds are a lot, well, not so much speeds, but the lap times, the handling of the bikes are a lot better, which has helped. But getting over there on a TZ750 two-stroke, being the beast that they were, and keeping up that momentum, it's probably, you said it was scary, but I tell you what, it must have been one of the biggest adrenaline rushes you could ever have back in those days.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, the funniest thing in my career was the first time I rode a TZ700 was at Daytona. I'd never ridden one before. The next time TZ750, the first time I ever raced it in Australia, was at Bathurst. So when we went to Europe and you start racing on places like the Isle of Man, the Ulster Grand Prix, I will say they were the best I ever rode and the easiest bike I ever rode. So it was a matter of getting around the corner, and if you knew the straight, just hold it flat and your lap times would be okay.
What was the handling like on those things?
The bikes handled reasonably well for what they had. The tyres, yes, I would almost say now the front Moto Grand Prix bike front tyre now would be about the same size as the rear one that we used to use. Sometimes 15, 10 laps, they were done and dusted, but if the race was 20, well, somehow you had to make it last. At some of the tracks, Norwest 200 and the Isle of Man used to have tyres laminate, so Dunlop at some stages made a really hard tyre that had lasted the distance, but it had no grip. So all those dynamics change, but all in all, the bike was a great bike. Only time I ever had a scary sort of moment at the Isle of Man was I did break a damper on the 750 and lucky enough to stay on, but very close to a bit of an accident. But
Where did that
Isle of Man
happen?
really was.
Not something like Sulby Strait or something, was it?
Luckily, no. It just happened as I was coming out of Ramsey Hairpin. There's the next right-hander. It broke there, got into a bit of a tank slapper, into the gutter, head through the screen, feet on the seat. Sort of managed to get it under control. I didn't know really what had happened at the time, but I did look down and I saw the steering damper's broken. And it's one of those things, until that day, you don't realise how important they are. Because I went up to Ramsey Hairpin, which is the next corner, and I just gunned it out there, not flat out. I was just cruising back to the start finish and got in another big tank slapper. So, yeah, no, in answer to most of it is the TZ750 was one of the best production motorcycles ever made.
Old Jeff Sayle, he's a bit of a laconic creature, and going back to those glory days of his racing and some of the names he's dropping there, you know, the John Woodleys, the Greg Hansfords, his brother Murray, all those great riders from a past era gone by. That was part one. Let's move on to the man that really set the world on fire back in his day and put Australia back on the map in the World Speedway. Let's talk to Jason Crump. Well, since Let's Talk Motorsport started, I've had the privilege and the honour to interview a number of world champions, starting with Colin Edwards, Johnny Ray and also Tom Sykes. But now it's my great pleasure to bring one of Australia's legends of the motorcycle world into your lounge rooms and onto your platforms and pods and everything, with the 3 times individual Speedway world champion and a total of 7 world championships in all, Jason Crump. Welcome, Jason, and thanks for joining us on Let's Talk Motorsport.
No worries, Braxy. It's a pleasure to join, and actually an honour to follow the names you've already mentioned and had on the show.
Well, you're adding to another one, and the list is going to keep growing. But in a way, I shouldn't really be talking to you at the moment, because at the beginning of the year, there was this little word that slipped out. You didn't make a big song and dance about it, but you were making a comeback to the British leagues in 2020 until this, plague hit us.
Yeah, it was something, the old racing bug or itch or whatever you want to call it. It kind of, it never leaves you, does it? It's a funny old thing, and I kind of end of 2012 I decided I'd had enough of racing properly, and at that stage of our lives, with the age of our kids and high school and friends and travel and homes and stuff like that coming into play, it was at that stage, the situation we were in, it suited us pretty well for me to stop racing and doing what we were doing. And we came back to Australia. Our daughter Mia, she's 21 this year, and she's down your way at uni in Melbourne. And Seth's he's just turned 17. He's in his last year of high school, and his aim is to get into some sort of road racing somewhere in the world. And you know what? I went to Perth at the end of January without being on a bike in nearly 18 months, and had a great weekend over there racing with Ty Wolfenden and a few of the talented young English kids that came over here this summer. And I was actually half competitive, Braxy, and I thought, shit, maybe I should have another crack at it.
I'm sure you're more than half competitive knowing you. But did retirement rest easy with you for those years? I know you were setting up businesses and Seth started racing and everything like that. But like a lot of sportsmen, when they leave the sport, depression, anxiety, I don't know what you call it, missing out on something, is life passing me by because something you've been working so hard for. And it covers all sports, rugby league, rugby union, anything where, a young professional is out of the game by the time they're in their mid-30s. So how did it sit with you?
At the time, it wasn't a problem. At the time, it's what I needed to happen. Speedway's quite different than almost every other form of motorsport in the fact that, there was many weeks of the year, Braxy, where I was racing 5 or 6 nights a week. I could be racing in 3 or 4 countries 5 or 6 nights a week for 6, 8, 10 weeks in a row. So as a Speedway rider, there's a heck of a lot of traveling. There's a heck of a lot of time away from home. It's a different life. And I've been doing that pretty much since I left school at 16 years of age. And by the time I got to 35, 36, 37, I was worn out. I was on the way down. Not because I couldn't race anymore or not because I wasn't probably fit or strong enough, but in the old head was kind of a bit worn out. And to say retirement didn't sit well would be wrong. I enjoyed being able to live the life we wanted to live and to do the things that we wanted to do at that point. But things change, the situation changes day to day, week to week, month to month. And right now, I felt like having a ride. I still feel like having a ride. If we hadn't been struck with COVID, then I'd be there kind of having a go right now.
Yeah, well, it'd be good to see, actually. And the Ipswich Witches, I believe it was supposed to be for 2020. So is that just postponed things and you'll be heading back over as soon as possible?
I hope so, yeah. I mean, the plan is, as far as I'm aware from British Speedway, that the season will start as soon as feasibly possible. When that's likely to be at the moment, I'm not sure. I'm hearing rumblings from Seth's BSB team that things could be happening a bit sooner, but as far as the Speedway goes, there's nothing concrete yet.
Now, let's go back a bit. You're part of a wonderful motorcycling dynasty, I suppose, with your grandfather, your father and yourself, and now Seth makes it 4 generations that have taken to the 2 wheels.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, really. I mean, my grandfather that raced was not my dad's dad, so that was that's my mother's father. So obviously it's a little different, but I mean, still it's a huge history in motorcycling, and as a family we're all very proud of what we've all achieved. And Seth's the first one away from Speedway, so it'll be interesting to see what he can do.
So just going back to your father, Phil, was he a bit, I suppose, alarmed because he came up through a different time of Speedway racing, that when you wanted to select that as your career?
Well, I mean, I say I selected it. I did select it. I mean, of course, my parents gave me a huge amount of support, as any parents do with kids in junior sport. But if I'm actually honest about it, my parents tried to encourage me to find something else to do, if you like. But my desire was to be a Speedway rider. And, I guess by the time I got to 15, 16, they realised that. And, of course, like I said, gave me terrific support and enabled me to go to the UK when I was quite young. I was lucky that my grandparents were over there, and my uncle Drew, he started helping me, basically from the first day I arrived in the UK, and he was with me my whole career. So I was very fortunate with the amount of help I got. But again, your father's a Speedway rider, your grandfather's still involved in the sport. It doesn't make it easier, it doesn't make it harder, because as with anything that's professional, the bullshit stops when the green flag drops, and you've still got to produce your own results, and you're always judged on what you produce and the form and skills that you develop yourself.
Now, how much of winning that World Under-21 title inspired you for greater things, that you've, cracked it against the world's best at that age group back in, what was that, 1999 or something?
1995.
95, wow. Well, I'm getting older. I'm getting older than I think I am.
Yeah, you know what? The Under-21 Championship was a pain in the backside for me as well. It was like the start of how things turned out for me. It always seemed to take me a few years to get the win, and I actually qualified for the Under-21 Speedway World Final first in 1993, and didn't even get to race the day. The final was in the Czech Republic, and I don't know what happened to me. I guess I ate something that was bad, but I was so sick the day of that final. I didn't even go to the track. I didn't even get out of bed. Or I got out of bed. My bed was on the floor in the hotel, in the bathroom of my hotel room, because I didn't know which end it was going to come out of, whether my head needed to be in there or I needed to be sitting on it. But that was disappointing to miss that final. And then the following year, 94, I was in the Under-21 final again, and just, to be honest, made a mess of it. So it took me a few years to win the Under-21, and it was a huge stepping stone, because at that stage, the FIM put a lot of impetus on the Under-21 Speedway World Championship. By winning this Under-21 World Championship, I got to automatic qualification into the Speedway Grand Prix in 1996. So it was a huge, the pressures on that Under-21 final were far more than just winning that day. But, what was available by winning it was huge.
No, well, you made every post a winner, and like you said, you got into the World Championships, and your first one came through in 2004. Was that a relief? Like you said, you're getting close and you had to take a couple of goes to get to it. Was it like, I've finally done it?
Yeah, because the 3 years before that, 2001, 2 and 3, I was actually the runner-up. I was second for those 3 years. This is quite embarrassing, I think, when I fall off here. But it took me a little while to get it all together, and like that race there, I mean, that, I had the World Championship won there and then, and Sullivan went down. He got excluded, so I only needed to finish in the first two positions in this particular race to it's funny to watch that.
Yeah, well, when you say me is 21 and there she is there on Mel's lap. Yeah.
And now I saw that the exclusion light came on and realised I was world champion. And then I fell off. What a clown.
Well, we can excuse you for that with the emotion that would have been going through you at the time.
Oh man, it was quite funny to look at that. I haven't seen that for years, but yeah,
you get a shiver when you look. You get a shiver when you look at it.
And gee, that's actually nice to see. Braxy, I've forgotten my other uncle, my dad's brother. Gee, you forget who's there at the time, don't you?
Yeah, well, in the rush and the emotion of it all, and I suppose you have to look at these things a few times to actually get it to sink in, because of just everything that's happening at the time, and all the build up and all of that release that comes with it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at that time, I think that was like the third restart of that race, because I think the first time in that race, Pedersen and I tangled up. That's Ryan Sullivan. He's an Aussie, actually.
And if you listen to that, he's not happy.
Who with?
With the officials for excluding him.
Yeah,
he's on the phone upstairs.
Yeah. Well, it didn't even really. The restart. Oh, there's Mel. This race didn't actually matter to me, Braxy, because I only had to finish first or second in it, and I'm clearly off the way. And I think I just let Pedersen go past me here. Yeah,
you did towards the end. I think the emotion got to you. Thought, I've actually done it. Why try and throw it into the fence?
Yeah, I was just cruising around because I only had to finish the race, and I was world champion. So yeah, it was. Yeah.
So was that out of the 23 wins, which one still stands out as the best? I know it's hard to say and hard to quantify when you've done 23 over so many years, but I suppose there's a top three that come to your mind whenever you think about something like that, if you still think about things like that.
You remember the first one for sure, don't you? I was pretty much an underdog to win. I was in my first year of the Speedway Grand Prix series. I wasn't having a very good time. It was a little frustrating for me. I seemed to be able to beat the big guys when we met in the league racing, in the domestic stuff, but I couldn't quite lift my game enough when it got to the World Championship in the early days to compete with them in the Grand Prix. So the first year was quite tough, and kind of rolled around to the British Grand Prix, which was at a track I knew reasonably well, and I think I actually was a track record holder at that place, and things didn't actually start off very well that night. My dad had come from Aussie a couple of days before, and he kind of said to me after a few races, your bike doesn't look very fast. Have you got something that's any faster? And we made a mechanical change, swap bikes. All of a sudden, things started going a bit better. And next thing, I find myself in the big final against Hans Nielsen, Greg Hancock, and Billy Hamill, who effectively were the top three riders in the world at that time. And I made a good start and actually won the race and won the final. So that was a stepping stone. It still took me. It still took me a few years after that, Braxy. That was 96, and I didn't hold my spot in the Grand Prix in 97. I had a year out and then qualified back in for 98, and held my spot. I was in the top 8 in the world from 1998, and even when I retired, I think I was ranked number 5 in the world in 2012, 5 or 6. So something I was very proud of, to maintain my position in the championship for all those years. And obviously the run from 2001 until 2010, when I was in the top 3 for all of those years as well, is something I'm also very proud of.
I was just about to bring that up. There's not many athletes in very many sports that can finish in the top 3 for 10 consecutive years and go so close to another championship like you won in 2004, 2006 and 2009. But in those intervening years, with I suppose a flick of the coin or a roll of the dice, there could have been a couple more there for you.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, yeah, maybe, but who knows? I mean, it's tough to say. I thought probably 2001 and 2003, I was pretty much around the best rider in the world. But that was my opinion. I had one poor Grand Prix. In 2001, there was 6 Grand Prix. The first one I finished like 15th or something, but in the next 5 I had a third, 2 seconds and 2 wins, and I wasn't world champion. So it showed the level of it showed how high a level Tony Rickardson and I were playing, the kind of how high we were playing with each other at that time. It was a tough old series between the two of us for a few years.
Well, another thing that I think gets lost on a lot of people with you looking at, you're saying about the World Championships and doing that for so many years and finishing in the top 3. As you alluded to before, a normal week for you would be England one night, Poland a couple of nights later, Sweden and a couple of nights later, and then do it all again. And to keep that level of consistency and the results to keep going, because the leagues are just as important to a lot of people as what the World Championships are. They've got that tribal instinct, particularly in different parts of the countries. Keeping your motivation up, jumping on planes and all the rest of it, having different bikes in different countries. So I think it's something that people don't really get their heads around, about how much competition you guys go through.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, what you said there was nearly correct. You said race in England and then a couple of nights later in Poland and a couple of nights later in Sweden. It's actually not a couple of nights at all, Braxy. It's one night here, one night there. It's, you race and you finish at 10, 11 o'clock at night, and at 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, you're on another aeroplane heading to the next country to compete the very next night or that night. So it's pretty tough, and speedways are, we don't race for Honda or Yamaha or KTM. We race for ourselves, and speedway riders look look after mechanic. You employ your own mechanics. You employ your own team. You own your own bikes. So there's a lot to organise along the way as well, and it's definitely a busy existence. And like I said earlier on in the conversation, it's probably why by the time I was 37, I was worn out because I've been doing it for 20 odd years, and I just needed a rest.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. You don't realise how much toll that takes on the body. And when you do it, is there a crew that goes with you to every race, or have you got your guys in different places? Because I presume you want the same people with you all the time, no matter where you were.
Have a kind of core of 2 or 3 people, and you generally keep one of them with you all most of the time. So it can be quite tough for the mechanics as well, because they end up doing a lot of travelling with you, and it's a hectic old season from April until October.
Do you and your dad actually sit around and relive the good old days from his career as well? Because we shouldn't overlook the fact that he finished 3rd in the world, setting the stage for you with big shoes to fill as well. But some of the guys he was competing against there, when you see the names on some of those old videos, and there's one in particular that I found, and you told me the other day that you'd actually raced in it, 8 guys in a final with 16 laps. That'd be complete madness.
Yeah, it kind of is, with the 2 rows of starting tapes, but this is actually at Ipswich, the club I'm racing for when we get going again. So a very, very similar track the track's actually nearly identical to this still. There's a couple of alterations. Obviously, they have an air fence now, but same venue, same shape pretty much as well. So, the old boy was actually pretty good at this race because it was 16 laps, and he was a pretty fit old. He's a farmer's son a fruit grower's son from Mildura. So, racing a motorbike around for 16 laps wasn't exactly like working with the grapes in 45-degree heat, is it?
No, not at all. But considering an average heat's only 4 laps, you've 4 times the length of it.
Yeah, but like I said, we all grew up racing our motorbikes out in the bush and out in the Sunset Country down there and at the Salt Lakes and everything. So everybody from that area is kind of used to riding their motorbike for more than a 1-minute speedway race, Braxy.
Yeah, and you did pretty well in this yourself too.
I didn't ride in the 16-lapper very often, but I did actually win the 16-lapper myself. So, yeah.
They were hard nuts back then as well. How much do you reckon it's changed since those days to these days? Well, to your day, to what we now see as 2020 tries and gets the championship going?
To be honest, Braxy, probably not so much since I finished. I mean, there's been a couple of small regulation changes within Speedway since I finished in 2012. Tyres are still the same. What's changed, the FIM brought a rev limiter in for the engines at 13,500. In my time, we didn't have a rev limiter. The exhaust has changed a tiny little bit. But apart from that, the chassis is very, very similar to what I last rode. So the big changes came in Speedway. Fundamentally the biggest change came in the early mid-90s when the engines went from the stand-up engine to the lay-down. Apart from that, small changes only in Speedway.
Now, just going back to your championships again, you won the 3 individuals, but you also won in a number of teams events. Obviously, they're very proud moments for you, but how do they stack up? Because an individual, you're doing it all year, whereas in the World Cup, as in the World Cup champion, what was that, 2001 and 2002, it's a different mindset as well, isn't it?
Well, I mean, the World Cup at that time, we had a great bunch of Aussie guys who were racing together at that time. And like we went in 2001, we went to Poland as the underdogs, and we won our qualifying round in Gdansk, and then we're faced with Poland in the final in Wrocław with maybe 30,000 Polish people there supporting Poland and 100 supporting us as Australia. And it's quite a hostile place, and like it's quite a hostile environment when you have so many people going against you. And it brought us all together, and like the performance that we as a team put together, particularly that night in Poland, was something that I'm really proud to have been a part of. We won other World Cups. We won in the Czech Republic in 1999, and we won in the UK, I think, the next year in 2002. But that particular event that we won in Poland in 2001 was that was probably one of the, that'd be in the top 10 moments in my career for sure. And that was not an individual event. That was a group of us Aussie boys racing the best guys in the world, and we hosed them.
Being the underdogs and the, far from the favourites because of where you were, I can imagine it, because they are, I think you've got to go there. We've seen it here a couple of times with the World Championships that have come to Australia, once in Sydney and twice in Melbourne, that there's a core of people that seem to follow them around with those amazing trumpets they've got.
Yeah, they get bloody annoying, and
that's an understatement.
They pierce your ears, don't they? They're just that noise. It just gets you, and but it's part of the show, Braxy.
Yeah, it certainly is. Now, going post-racing, you've been pretty busy as well. Let's talk about young Seth for a while. Were you a bit surprised when he decided to go to the bitumen route instead of the speedway route, or dirt track for that matter?
Well, I was actually surprised that he wanted to ride a motorbike, because as probably a lot of people wouldn't understand, that although he has had motorcycles his whole life, he was never really that committed to riding them. So, I generally have to bribe him with a pair of goggles or gloves or a new set of LP's riding gear or something to get him to go out riding with me for a day or for a weekend or something. And then I think all of a sudden, Troy and Ollie were onto him to go and have a ride at the go-kart track on the bike, where they were riding at the time. And I think it still took a little bit to convince him to go there, but I knew we were in trouble, Braxy, the first day on the way home when he said, "I think we should buy a bike, Dad. I think I want to go and do this a bit more often."
I bet it did, but he has, I don't know if he surprised people, but he's run some great efforts there, particularly on the bike that he was having, the KTM single cylinder, compared to the other bikes he was up against, and how quick he adapted to it. One that comes to mind for me is a few years ago at the Phillip Island support class. I think it was for the Grand Prix, where it was in the wet, and I suppose he was skating around like he was on a speedway bike going around there.
Well, he actually, his parents, Mel and I, had decided that we were going to put a set of wet tyres on for that race, and the race actually didn't start in the rain. We were quite sure that it was going to rain at some point, and Mel and I had spoken about it, and Seth was adamant that he wanted dry tyres on, and we made the decision that he was going out with wets on. And of course, in less than 2 laps of the race starting, the heavens opened, and I think there was a group of 5 or 6 of them that actually had wets on, and they went from kind of mid-pack to the front. And yeah, he'd only been riding for 6 months or so at that stage, Braxy, and yeah, he rode a bloody good race, and he showed the importance of even in that little 300 class, he showed the importance of actually leading the race at different times, and he learned a lot from that day. And obviously he was absolutely stoked with it, and I was kind of a little surprised that he'd managed to win. But what a place to get your first race win in road racing at Phillip Island at MotoGP weekend. He was absolutely stoked.
Exactly. So has he had any inkling to ask you to teach him to ride a speedway bike?
Never. He's never asked me. He's only ridden a speedway bike a couple of times, and to be honest with you, Brax, he actually rides a speedway bike pretty good. he's seen enough of it, so he understands what the fundamentals of it are. And I took him to, actually to Ipswich Speedway up here in Queensland, just near Queensland Raceway, and he jumped on the bike the second time ever, and he rode around and, give him a little more pace. He had a good style on the bike, and he just needed a bit more pace to look like a proper speedway rider.
Well, the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree, they say, mate. So if he put his mind to it, and as he's proven on the bitumen where you don't slide quite as much, he can still slide those little proddy bikes around as well.
Yeah, he does all right. He has a bit of fun, but I mean, he's 17, Braxy, and his mum and dad are paying for him to go racing, so why wouldn't he be having fun?
Exactly right, mate. Well, hopefully it works out for him going over to the BSB and racing over there. But when we're talking about road racing, a little known fact is the fact that you actually dipped your toes into a road racing boot at one stage and had a bit of a steer.
I did. As you're aware, Neil Bird was a huge part of my racing career, and I don't know, years and years ago we decided that he thought that I should have a go, and kind of seemed like a good idea. Again, I was young at the time, and jumped on and had a ride of Gavin Cosway's bikes, which were actually Troy's bikes, I think, at the time, and it was great fun. It probably was never going to really go anywhere, but it was fun to go and do it and have a go at it. But I realised very quickly, Braxy, that my racing skills lied in speedway.
Well, it's better to walk away like that than to try and push it too far. Now, before we close up, just in recent years, you've been keeping a pretty close eye on Australian Speedway and World Speedway for that matter. How do you rate the state of Australian Speedway and the boys that we've got now to go in and fill in your footsteps, I suppose, because there's a whole breed of them out there?
Yeah, there is. And, Chris Holder was world champion in 2012 and Jason Doyle was world champion, 2017. We've got good riders. We've got young Max Frick, who's qualified for his first year in the World Championship this year. Obviously, a difficult year for your first year with the way everything's happening. But we've got a reasonably good. We've got a good level of high riders. We just need a couple more of those guys to take the next step to become super riders in the Grand Prix. Max Frick's on his way to doing that. Jason Doyle could be world champion this year or next year or the year after. He's good enough to do that. Chris is obviously, after he won the world championship, he suffered terrible injuries, and that's kind of almost put a bit of a hold on his career progress. But you never know with Chris Holder. He could come back next year stronger than ever and get back to the top of Speedway. I wouldn't be surprised, but he needs to do that sooner rather than later if he's going to do it. But his brother Jack is actually probably one of our bright prospects at the moment. He rides very well. He's got an attitude where he doesn't really care who's who, and he'll get out and put himself around, and he's not scared to go where it hurts. So the future's not bad. We've got the potential as a nation to have some really good riders in the next 3 to 5 years, and they've just got to kind of continue to progress as they are at the moment.
So the grassroots is looking good too?
Well, I'm not saying the grassroots is looking good, but we've got a couple of riders that are almost ready to be very, very good riders. The grassroots level always needs to be maintained, and that's something that in this particular time it's difficult to do, but I think the finger's been taken off the pulse a little bit in Australia with the grassroots level of speedway. It does tend to go in cycles, but at the moment, in kind of 3 to 5 years' time, I think we could have a little bit of a hole in the young riders coming through. There's a little bit of a gap there that's starting to develop at the moment. So we need to keep the young riders. We need to keep that train going, and we need to keep people getting on it so that we've got a continuing progression and a continuing train of riders coming through.
Well, I'm sure you won't be backward in coming forward and putting some of your ideas to the powers that be, I'm sure.
Well, that's, I'm always available to give opinions and to do things, Braxy, but it's it's more than one person's job to get it happening.
Well, I think you've been very diplomatic there, Crumpy, that's for sure.
Well, it comes down to a lot of organisation, and there's a lot of clubs in Australia who are trying hard. They could probably do things maybe differently in some ways or another, but again, it's difficult for me because I'm not involved in the day-to-day development of Speedway in this country. Maybe nobody is. Maybe that's a problem, Braxy.
Well, that's a fair point too. So, and now looking for you personally with what's going on, what are you doing to keep fit? Because what replicates riding a speedway bike around a dirt track completely sideways and just one step out of being from out of control with trying to hand-to-eye coordination, all the rest of it that goes with it?
Well, I'm hoping that some tracks can start to open up soon. Seth and I have been up to Willowbank a couple of times to do some motocross, and there are actually a couple of private speedway tracks in Queensland on private property that I've been invited to, and I've actually taken that offer up. So I've actually ridden a few times in the last couple of months, so it's not been too bad. But clearly, once we get a start, if and when we get a start date for the Speedway in the UK to start up, then obviously I'll have to get back over there and get into some riding as quickly as possible.
All right, mate. Well, we better leave you to it so you can go and have a look. But thanks for joining us on Let's Talk Motorsport. I could talk to you for hours because there's plenty of things that you like to talk about, we'd like to talk about. But thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll have you back on again sometime soon, and all the best for the season that hopefully gets underway very shortly for you.
No problem, Braxy. Thanks for having me, and good luck. Good to talk to you too.
Thanks, mate. Sign from the other side of the fence in the Speedway. But great stories, and if you want to catch up with them or any of the other previous 17 episodes, please log on to our website, letstalkmotorsport.com.au. We've got everything there, all our socials, also our podcasts, all the information on that. Also, we want to hear from you with show us what you've got. It's been a bit quiet on the ground of lately, but there's a couple in the pipeline there. Please keep them coming in on cars, karts and two wheels. And until next time, I'm Mark Brack signing off. Keep it all upright and see you next week.